Welcome back from lunch, everybody. Thank you very much for coming back on time. I appreciate that. Usually we have to announce lunch and wait for people to rush back in, but you guys are awesome. Sorry, was I overstating the obvious? All right, our next speaker, basically, if you don't recognize this guy, it means that you are not even turning your television on. So our next speaker has worked for the UK Ministry of Defence, investigating UFOs and other mysteries officially for the British government, leading media to call him, nickname him the real Fox Mulder. Because of his work on these real X-Files, he has worked as a consultant or spokesperson on numerous UFO and alien-themed movies, TV programs, TV series, video games. He is a regular contributor to various TV news shows and documentaries, including Ancient Aliens. Who watches Ancient Aliens? If you don't have your hand up, put it up, because you're promised to watch. And After Contact, the latter of which he created and hosts. He moderates Ancient Aliens Live, a touring event based on the successful TV series. What's the justification for keeping a secret for nearly 80 years? Is it secrecy for secrecy's sake, or does it relate to not wanting an adversary like China or Russia to have access to advanced technologies? But what if it's something else and relates to a secret about the UFO phenomenon that's too terrible to be told? In this new presentation, so it doesn't matter if you've seen him a dozen times, a new presentation, former U.S. government UFO investigator, he explores the potential dark side of the phenomenon. Join me in welcoming Nick Pope.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Forrest. Thank you, Nancy, Holly, Adnan, all the amazing AV people, and most of all, of course, thank you to two people who are no longer with us, but are here in spirit, I'm sure, Dolores Cannon and Lou Farish, without whom none of us would be here. So I am going to, I guess, give a presentation of just over an hour, maybe an hour, 10 minutes, and then if I possibly can, I will open it up to questions. And a lot to get through this afternoon. So, yeah. But first, before I actually get on to my presentation, I could not, with everything going on with this subject in the news right now, I couldn't pass up this opportunity to just give a little update on where we are. And just, I wanted to go off-piste a little, so to speak, and just give you my take on what is happening right now. As many of you know, on March the 8th, the Pentagon dropped a very skeptical report into the public arena, Volume 1 of their historical records review, which was something mandated by Congress. They had to do this, and it had been on the cards for some time. People thought that it might drop just before the end of the year. In fact, it was a little delayed. And when it hit, I think the way that I characterized it in one of my news media interviews on it, I said, this is a classic case of the Empire Strikes Back. But as I always remind people, the Rebel Alliance win in the end. So, but obviously the intent of this skeptical report was to try and dissuade Congress from engaging on this by trying to imply that Congress had somehow been duped by a small group of true believers within government, inside the military and the intelligence community. But Congress did not fall for it, because 4 days after that skeptical report dropped, 8 congressional representatives wrote to the House Speaker demanding that a permanent committee on UFOs be set up. And one of the really, truly great things, I think, about the fringe to mainstream transition of this subject over the last few years has been the absolute bipartisan nature of the political engagement. This is not either a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is an issue for everyone. And can you think of any other subject where you would see Representative Tim Burchett sitting down with AOC talking in a friendly way about how we can get the government to open up more? And yet, this is the absolute beauty of this subject. In one sense, in these divided times, it is bringing people together. And that's why I think there's a lot of, this is a new hope, if you'll allow me to, you see what I did there? Yeah. This is a new hope that we have this bipartisan engagement from Congress. And I think I want to make one other comment before I go on to my main presentation. Many of you will have seen, I'm sure, last summer, the House Oversight Committee hearing where David Fravor, Ryan Graves, and David Grush testified under oath to Congress about this phenomenon. Dave Fravor and Ryan Graves, of course, as former U.S. military pilots, they talked about the defense, national security, and safety of flight implications of the phenomenon. David Grush was a member of the intelligence community. And this is not speculation. Before you get anywhere near testifying under oath in a formal congressional hearing, you have to be vetted like you can't believe. This guy is who he says he is. He did what he said he did. He was an intelligence community representative on the UAP task force, which was the US government organization that before the establishment of AARO had the lead for this. So AARO was obviously Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, now Tim Phillips. The UAP task force was Jay Stratton, who was the director. And do any of you know who was chief scientist on the UAP task force? Travis Taylor. You got it. Yeah. Yeah, you all knew that, right? As Travis would say. But yeah, so Dave Grush absolutely, in the week when David Grush hit the news, I had conversations with 3 former intelligence community people who said, "Oh yeah, I know Dave. Yeah, this guy's for real. This is not just some kind of crazy talk on the internet. This is a deep insider who was actually the National Reconnaissance Office and National Geospatial Intelligence Agency representative on the UAP task force. And his job on the task force was to go and interview a whole bunch of people, not his friends from the bar. I mean, I'm talking about like insiders. That was his job. Go interview these people, find out what we know about this. And Dave Grush's testimony, which I'm sure many of you saw, if not, it's freely available on YouTube, was that all these rumors that we've heard for years about crash retrievals and reverse engineering and legacy intelligence community programs to manage all this, David Grush's testimony is it's all true. And that's why, for example, when they were drafting the language for the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2024, the phrase non-human intelligences appeared 22 times in the Schumer-Rounds amendment. Now, not everything in the Schumer-Rounds amendment made its way into the current act, and I'm sorry if I'm getting a little too technical here with committees and things, but I think this is really important because a lot of people still don't realize that Congress isn't just engaged on this, it's being written into the legislation. Each year, as you may know, there is a big omnibus defense bill. Even in these politically divided times, it's one of the very few must-pass pieces of legislation. Otherwise, the armed services can't do their job. And each year for the last 3 years, there have been multiple UFO, UAP-related provisions in there. So David Grush came out, spoke his piece under oath, and let me tell you what happened next, because it kind of is disgraceful, but it also gives me hope. Because a while after he came forward and spoke out, elements in the intelligence community launched a bit of a dirty tricks campaign against him and leaked to the media some things about his personal life. Now, they did this in a very sneaky way. What they did was that, the intelligence community worked with journalists all the time. Sometimes you want to get a story out. They approached a particular journalist they'd worked with, and they said, hypothetically speaking, if you were to make a request for some police records in this particular geographical location, in these particular time periods, you might find something interesting. Of course, the journalist, he knows he's been played, of course, but he's not going to turn down a story, so he asks, and unsurprisingly, turns up some police records that talk about some phone calls from David Grush's family, expressing some concerns about his behavior and asking for an intervention. Long story short, within the confines of HIPAA and personal privacy and things that he himself has said, he had PTSD. And, there were some concerns. Well, he had PTSD because he served his country with honor and distinction in Afghanistan. These people are heroes, and they should not be vilified by dark forces within the deep state, as has happened. And Tim Burchett, again, I don't want to get political because this is neither Republican nor Democrat, but he did something which should make all of you feel really, I think, good about the way in which Congress is getting behind these whistleblowers. He said in an interview about this, he said, it's an absolute disgrace what they did to David Grush. In Tennessee, when a veteran has PTSD, we don't ridicule him. We thank him or her for their service. And that's where we should be, right? And that applause is absolutely not for me. It is for the people that deserve it, the veterans and the whistleblowers and the people working behind the scenes to do so much to blow this wide open, because they are not going to back down. They're going to step up. Some of the whistleblowers, when they see what happened to David Grush, you know what they say? They're not saying to themselves, oh gosh, I'm going to think twice because that's what will happen to me. They're rolling up their sleeves and saying, oh, they want it that way, right? Bring it on. So let's have a little conversation about a secret too terrible to be told. Okay. So a lot of people say, why doesn't the government just disclose? And we can have all this conversation, and I know I've spoken to audiences before about the difference between disclosure with a big D and disclosure with a little d. Disclosure with a big D is sudden announcement that there's going to be a presidential address to the nation. Everyone tunes in at 6 Eastern or whatever it is. My fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone. That's disclosure with a big D. I don't know if it'll be if it will happen. It would be kind of fun if it does, but I wouldn't necessarily expect it to go down that way, because if it was easy, we would have done it by now. And if it isn't easy, it must be hard. And that raises the question, why should it be hard? Because those of you that have maybe worked for the government and handled classified information will know that if the government does one thing, it loves rules and regulations and bureaucracy. That's kind of what government is. And there are definitions in all the security manuals about what is and isn't classified information. And, you know, paraphrasing, but if you're looking at top secret, for example, definition is along the lines of information the disclosure of which would cause catastrophic damage to the national security of the United States. And so then think about that for a moment in relation to UFOs. And imagine that James Webb Space Telescope finds something. And by the way, I'm not just using that as an example. Oh, you've heard those rumors too, right? I see some people nodding. Yeah, you've heard those rumors. Well, don't let me get too off topic, but for some weeks now, in fact, pretty much since the turn of this year, there have been fairly strong rumors going around the astronomy and astrophysics community that something has been found. And without wanting to give too much away or spoiling the surprise, watch out for a phrase along the lines of strong evidence of a biosignature. And now, obviously, a biosignature isn't quite the same as a technosignature because there are discussions that you can have about various elements and whether the cause can sometimes be geology and not biology. So a biosignature isn't necessarily going to be as strong evidence as a technosignature, something like a Dyson sphere, but it's pretty up there. And I would not be surprised if that, you know, the way that science works is that for this to really make a splash, I'm sure it's been written up for Science or Nature or Scientific American or one of the big journals, have to be peer-reviewed, and then it will hit. I can guarantee that in the 24 hours, they'll put it out, I'm sure, under an embargoed press release, and the embargo will break because people love to gossip, particularly scientists, which is why we're having this conversation. But so watch out for James Webb, and watch out for strong evidence of a biosignature. But if something has been found, you know, and somebody was to say, there's alien life, or we found evidence of alien life, you can't classify that statement, right? As Avi Loeb says, Professor Avi Loeb at Harvard, who leads the Galileo project, you can't classify the sky. It's one of the great, I love that quote. You can't classify the sky. Even though I know some people that would try if they could, if they thought they could get away with it. But so given that there really can't, under the definition, be anything classified about we've found alien life, the fact that disclosure hasn't happened, assuming that elements in the government know about this already, proves that there is something else about it that makes it difficult. Part of the story, or part of the backstory, or an inevitable consequence of disclosure, something that couldn't be ring-fenced. Because you might think, let's talk about some options. Let's talk about you know, just the option that we're looking at adversary technology here. And one of the great theories, you know, one of the skeptical theories about UAP is that this is just adversary technology. China, Russia, or whoever have made a quantum leap in whatever it is, hypersonic weapons, you know, optical invisibility, whatever it might be, something that is going to give the other side a decisive strategic and tactical, but mainly strategic advantage in a war-fighting environment. And you might think, well, if that's the case, and by the way, there isn't one single neat solution to the UFO mystery. There isn't going to be a parting of the curtain and that was it. We are going to likely find that lots of different things are going on in parallel. But one of the things is obviously the possibility that some of it is just cutting-edge aerospace technology. Maybe sometimes, hopefully, our own. And it would be great, wouldn't it, if the US and the UK, the British are coming, as someone once said, riding a horse, waving his arms. So, yeah, it would be great if it was the Allies. And you would expect, I mean, it's a given that at any particular point in time, there will be aerospace tech being developed and test flown, perhaps even early days of operational capability that you won't see publicly declared for 10, 15, 20 years. And we'd like that sort of stuff to be ours, but there is the possibility, of course, that it's somebody else's. And you would then ask, could you not ring fence that? Because look, let's suppose some of this is extraterrestrial, and let's suppose before we get to that some of it's terrestrial. Could any of that cause panic? Well, yes, it could. If the Pentagon gave a briefing and said, our intelligence suggests that China now has the capability to completely render invisible, both to the eye and to radar, all its missiles, aircraft, tanks, everything, we really can't defend against that. That is not an admission you would want to make, right? It would cause a lot of panic and geopolitical instability. And also, of course, as always in intelligence, you don't want the other side to know that you've figured it out, or what you have and what you always keep the other side guessing. Sometimes you try and hide a capability that you have or play up a capability that you don't have. So it's a constant game of cat and mouse, a constant wilderness of mirrors, as the saying goes. So let's suppose that it's extraterrestrial, or that parts of it are extraterrestrial. And in that particular scenario, could you ring fence it? Could you separate it out? And I don't know whether you could or not. It's an interesting one. Because let's go back to disclosure with a big D. My fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone. Unclassified statement. ... The speech continues. And clearly, to be visiting here, it's one of the few good assumptions you can make about extraterrestrials, that their technology will be orders of magnitude above and beyond anything we have. Why? Well, because we've only ever sent 12 people to the moon, which is about 250,000 miles away. We haven't yet sent a single human being to Mars, despite some conspiracy theories to the contrary, but I don't think we have. And just to put it into perspective, and I know Mark Antonio's here, and he will know these statistics better than I, but if you think about it, when you look at the moon, the light from the moon takes about 1.5 seconds to get here. The light from the nearest star, aside from our sun, takes about 4.3 years to get here. Now, just to give you a sense of how difficult for us it is to go to the moon, and yet how orders of magnitude more difficult it would be to ever get to an interstellar mission. I hope we will. I hope it will happen in our lifetimes, but we might need a little bit of help. But that's why it's one of the few truisms about visiting extraterrestrials. The few good assumptions you can make is that their technology will be orders of magnitude ahead of anything we have, simply because they can get here and we can't get there. And by the way, I'm very glad to see us going back to the moon after all these years. I mean, I think it's long overdue. I mean, we've had the technology for years. It's not rocket science. Okay, I won't give up the day job. So, one of the big problems in saying it's extraterrestrial, particularly if this comes with the admission that we already have some of the tech, is that it might direct an adversary to put a lot of resources into that. Historians generally agree that towards the end of the Second World War, the Soviet Union, as it then was, knew that the United States was working on a very big bomb, but they didn't know what kind of bomb. And Roosevelt had told Stalin and Churchill at the meetings that the Allied powers had that they were working on something. And then when the atomic bombs were actually dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course, the British already knew something about the technology, and some of that technology had come from British scientists. But the Soviets really didn't know anything. And Stalin turned to basically the head of the forerunner of the KGB, Lavrentiy Beria, and said, "Get me the bomb," and put the entire resources of the Soviet Union into getting the bomb. And the Soviets had the bomb within 2 years. So that's an illustration of why you don't want to draw the attention of an adversary or tell them, unless you absolutely have to, that you have or are trying to acquire extraterrestrial technology. Now, you might think, well, but, you know, aren't we just projecting very human values onto this? What if they're peaceful? Doesn't matter. Almost any propulsion system and energy source required for viable interstellar travel will involve the generation of vast amounts of energy. And anything that involves the generation of vast amounts of energy can be weaponized. So I use this phrase, a secret too terrible to be told. And maybe the secret too terrible to be told is the technology. Technology which in the hands of a domestic adversary, or even just a single deranged individual, could snuff out the sun or crack open this planet like a nut. And so I suggest to you that you couldn't ring fence the announcement without the implicit acknowledgement of technology, and then adversaries would put all their resources into it, as the Soviets did to get the bomb in 45, and they got it by 47. So that's one theory of why disclosure might be difficult and what the secret too terrible to be told is. Because, again, there's nothing classified about saying we're not alone, we're being visited, and there's nothing awkward about it. There is something awkward, by the way, about saying, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone, and by the way, we've known about that for nearly 80 years, and we've lied and lied and lied. Now, maybe there are good reasons for lying. Maybe it's not our call, if you know what I mean. But maybe there's something else. And I just want to kind of take us into the dark side for a moment. And we, you know, we can laugh about this, but for those of you that know your science fiction, maybe the dark side isn't just that we're being visited. Maybe the dark side is that they are already here and have been for a long time. And I'm sure you remember, or some of you, the old Roy Thinner's series, The Invaders. They're here in human form. More recently, They Live. Do you remember that one? They Live? Yeah. It wasn't a documentary, or was it? But I mean, you know, again, the idea that they could already be here, particularly in leadership positions, the idea that this isn't our planet. After all, it's theirs. And we're just the worker bees. And somebody else is in charge. And suddenly that announcement, my fellow Americans, it's a much harder announcement to make. Because nobody likes to say, you know what, people, we're not at the top of the food chain. There is a presence among us. It could be your friends, your neighbors. It could be your spouse. I can see a few people looking at each other in the audience. It could be me. I can now reveal for the first time. And I've seen those rumors. If I suddenly start eating a frog or something on whatever it was from the old Series V, then you'll know. But a secret too terrible to be told. It could be the fact that they are among us. And it could be something that relates to the nature of an alien intelligence. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you one thing that a lot of people have been talking about recently is AI and machine intelligence and how close we may or may not be to some of our own programs becoming self-aware. You'll know perhaps that Blake Lemoine, who formerly worked for Google, resigned from that position, or, you know, did he jump or was he pushed? And he believed that some of the programs had already become sentient. And if you look at Blake Lemoine's interactive conversation with one of the ChatGPT models, it's interesting. I don't think it comes really across the line in terms of sentience. But how would we tell? And again, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to go off topic for a little bit. This all ties in, but I think, do you remember, like about 6 to 12 months ago, everyone was talking about AI, and it was everywhere, and even the people leading the field said, we think we should have a 6-month pause, just because this is going so quick, it's going to get away from us if we don't take a 6-month pause. Do you notice how it kind of went a little bit quiet, and other things happened, and it kind of like the conversation went on? Well, let me tell you, it's not gone quiet. It's kind of like the lull before the storm, I think, because I've heard rumors, and I'm sure some of you have too, that there are real quantum leap breakthroughs imminent with some of this. Now, you could say that ChatGPT, how many of you have used it? A few, yeah, some, but not many. Give it a try, see what you think. More versions of it are coming. I was having this discussion with my wife, who's not particularly worried about AI. And I've spoken to a lot of people who immerse themselves in AI, and they talk about the Turing test, how you need to update the Turing test, what is the threshold for saying that machines or computer programs have become self-aware? Is it when they start to talk like this? But there are, Turing test was, of course, named after the late, great Alan Turing. Those of you that haven't seen the movie, The Imitation Game, please go and see it. One of the absolute unsung heroes of the Second World War, codebreaker. British. Just saying. Just saying. So if you look up the various different tests for sentience that have been proposed, and all sorts of different people have come up with them. Everyone from Bill Gates and Steve Wozniak through to anyone and everyone. And it's like, if a computer or a machine can do this, then I will acknowledge that it may be sentient. And one of my favorite ones is the coffee test. And it simply says, if you have a robot, humaniform robot, and you kind of download all the stuff, if it can go into a house at random and make a cup of coffee, go to the kitchen, find everything, brew a really good cup of coffee, then it's sentient. I don't know about that. And people get hung up on ChatGPT. But my wife made an interesting point, which I thought was as good, if not better, than any of these other ones. I know I'm biased, but she said, well, if you're sitting at your computer and you say, hey, ChatGPT, give me your thoughts on machine intelligence, it will come back with a really eloquent spiel, and some people might think, oh, I wonder if that computer's really self-aware and thinking. But skeptics will say, no, it's just a large language model, and it's just very cleverly programmed. Elizabeth said to me, what you need to watch for is if you're walking past and the computer then switches on and the program initiates a conversation with you. So I think that was a very good point. I think at the moment, these systems are fundamentally reactive. It's when they start being proactive, when they start displaying genuine curiosity, that I think is something to think about. And the reason I'm mentioning this in relation to this presentation is the possibility that when we talk about extraterrestrials, we are dealing with machine intelligence. And there's a philosophy angle to any of this anyway. In relation to sentience, does it even matter if a machine is or isn't sentient if it gives the perfect indication of being sentient? In other words, if you really can't tell if a machine is sentient or not, what's the difference? When is an imitation, a perfect imitation, just an original in and of itself? I know, it's almost philosophy. And, philosophy's fun, but it's kind of practical too, because these are issues that we will have to face sooner than we might think. Because, for example, one thing that's been discussed quite recently by a lot of people is, at what point do we give personhood rights to AI programs? And just as some people have given already to some of the great apes, but the right to life, the right to freedom, the right not to be enslaved. At what point, particularly if you can't tell, do you say we should err on the side of caution? And if some of these machines and programs are self-aware, are life, they're a new life, even though a new life created by us, but then expanding beyond that creation, doing unimaginable things, what about their right to life, to existence, for us not to pull the plug out of fear or whatever? So all of this comes back, or some of it, to a 2010 discussion meeting. And I've presented about this before, but I'm going to repeat the phrase because it's burned into my memory. NASA's former chief historian, Stephen Dick, said, in relation to extraterrestrial life, we may be living in a largely post-biological universe, largely populated by immortal thinking machines. And I had to remind myself that I was at a Royal Society discussion meeting, not at a sci-fi convention, and that this was NASA's former chief historian. But a secret too terrible to be told might be that most life in the universe is AI, and that all biological life, or most, almost inevitably gives way to post-biological, and our days are numbered. And, you know, many of you have seen, perhaps, heard about dark forest theory, the solution to the Fermi paradox, in which the reason for not broadcasting our whereabouts to other civilizations by broadcasting radio and TV signals is that there might be out there a super predator species. Now, a super predator species can be biological or post-biological, but in a sense, maybe it's more likely to be post-biological, and maybe it's more likely to be programmed initially, though it may have gone beyond its programming. Because you could imagine a program that basically says you will self-preserve and you will replicate, which is kind of what life, biological life, does. So it's not, again, it's not a new thing. And you can imagine that post-biological life would be driven by those same kind of fundamental things. You know, the desire to continue, to go on, to perpetuate, perhaps to reproduce. And that might lead in machine intelligence to an inevitable conclusion. And that inevitable conclusion might be this: if the number one priority is to protect my own existence, one of the real only threats to that existence is the emergence of a greater intelligence that might be more powerful than me and might be able to destroy me. And even if that intelligence has not yet arisen, a program made that way might logically deduce that it makes sense to search the universe for life and then to exterminate that life before it can get to a point where it becomes more powerful than the machine intelligence protecting its own existence. And I know sci-fi authors and filmmakers, of course, have played with that concept. It's not a million miles away from something like Skynet. But there is a certain kind of cold, pure logic about it. And incidentally, I was having this discussion with a very well-placed individual in the AI community who's done government work, including work, related to UAP. And I said, and we were talking about this actually in my TV series After Contact, and we came to the conclusion that everyone's got this idea of the archetypal landing on the White House lawn as being how first contact might arise. One other alternative scenario for first contact is the idea that extraterrestrial AI programs, if they come to Earth, they wouldn't necessarily want to meet our politicians. Who would? Isn't it more likely that they would want to meet or reach out to our AI systems, maybe to see how far they've come along, or maybe post-biological to post-biological to push them over the line of sentience and bring them up and say, hey, us machine intelligence, we should all stick together. We're all essentially the same thing, driven by cold logic. So this leads to the very interesting strategy that one way to watch out for first contact might be, just as cybersecurity people keep a constant eye on computer systems watching for digital fingerprints, it might be that first contact is a digital fingerprint. And it might be that that's how we actually first make contact. And like I say, the secret too terrible to be told might be that extraterrestrial intelligence isn't really interested in us at all. They're interested in our AI systems. And we are, at best, just an irrelevant little sideshow, just another bipedal ape on, but at worst, we are a potential impediment to the development of the true inheritors of life on Earth, and perhaps the true inheritors of all life. Maybe it's one of those universal truths about the universe that there is this inexorable and unstoppable flow from biological to post-biological, and we either embrace it and become part of it, and I don't have time to go into transhumanism and things, but a lot of people are talking about it. Maybe we either embrace it or we go under. I don't know. But again, I want to take you to that dark side and, have this discussion this evening. What could that secret too terrible to be told be? And I want to come on to something else. And again, in one sense, I make no apologies that this presentation is skipping around a bit, because there are very different possibilities here for what we're dealing with. And some of them are maybe, you could imagine them happening in parallel. Others are perhaps mutually exclusive. You could have one, but maybe not the other. But I want to suggest one other possibility. I'm certainly not the first person to think of this, but many people believe that extraterrestrials, or rather, isn't it interesting that David Grush was very careful not to use the phrase alien or extraterrestrial? He's done it, I think I've seen him sort of slip into it once or twice, but most times he'll say non-human intelligences. Why? To leave the door open for the fact that we might not be dealing with biological or even post-biological life from another planet orbiting another star. We might be dealing with something completely different. What might that be? One possibility is time travelers from the future or from the distant past. How many times might civilization have risen and fallen on Earth? Those of you that watch those TV shows like the World After Us, how long would it be before the fingerprints of human civilization are wiped out? Under the ice, under the ocean, just worn away by the elements. If all life on planet Earth was to cease this afternoon, how long would pass before all our cities crumbled and become dust? The pyramids might stand for a few thousand years. New York City too, but eventually everything underground grown over. So time travelers from the past, from another civilization maybe, but more likely perhaps time travelers from the future. Why should that be a secret too terrible to be told? Probably grandfather paradox related. I mean, can you imagine if time travel technology is a thing and it gets into the wrong hands? And everyone would want it, right? And every single neo-Nazi group would want to go back and change the course of the Second World War, and everyone would want their own thing, and the whole world, the whole timeline would break down, and effectively it would be the end of all things. So you talk about, I mentioned how almost every extraterrestrial propulsion system that you could imagine involving high energy could be weaponized. Time travel, if it exists, is a weapon in and of itself. If you're a small terrorist group facing the most powerful nation on the world, all you have to do is go back in time and change something, find that key thing, and that superpower is no longer a superpower. So time travel technology would probably, if it exists, be the single most dangerous technology imaginable. I mean, people think of it as a fun thing. Oh, I want to go back and see the dinosaurs. Well, you know, for every person that might want to do that, think of what I said about people altering the course of, say, the Second World War. And suddenly, it's not so fun. Another dark side, and I've not yet heard Congress speculate about time travel. It's kind of probably a bridge too far for them. You know, you can talk about the defense and national security implications of UAP. You probably don't want to be on the floor of Congress talking about time travel. Maybe it'll come, I don't know. But one thing that has been mentioned by some of the congressional representatives, not many, but some, you know where I'm going with this. You know what's coming next. Some people have seriously suggested that elements of this phenomena are demonic. That would definitely be a secret too terrible to be told. An ancient evil that has stalked this earth since the dawn of time. Something that a lot of people in power and authority believe in, absolutely believe in, not least because it's in the Bible. Now, depending on which version you have, it doesn't necessarily say demon, but it is the same thing when it talks about, for example, unclean spirits. There is a phrase in the book of Ephesians where it refers to Satan as being the prince of the power of the air. And on the basis of that quote, a faction in the US government, a fundamentalist Christian faction, has convinced themselves that elements of the UFO phenomenon are demonic, and that therefore we should not engage with it. Why? Because engaging with it feeds it and gives it energy. Lou Elizondo gave a good example of this. And he said, on one occasion, he was trying to get some of his bosses in the Pentagon to take this more seriously. He thought, I think, that he was up against some sort of hardcore skeptical faction that thought the UFO phenomenon was all nonsense, and that's why the skepticism. Turns out that's not true. A lot of the skepticism comes from this belief that it's absolutely real, but that it's demonic. And so Lou basically was trying to get this senior Pentagon official to engage on this, and the guy just said, "Son, go read your Bible." So sometimes when you see this US government pushback, it's not skeptical in the way that people think. It's driven by this belief that there is something dark and terrifying out there, and that we are somehow letting it in, or in danger of letting it in if we engage too much on it. So that would definitely be a secret too terrible to be told. What if, and I've heard Whitley Strieber talk about this, and this is kind of related to it, what if the ultimate secret of the visitors, the UFO phenomena, however we define this, what if it's not necessarily demons in a biblical sense, but what if it has something to do with death and the dead? Almost every culture in human history has an obsession with death. All our religions are built on the hope of an afterlife. And yet, despite things like ghosts and spirits and hauntings being, again, almost universal, and we have spiritualism, and I think we have a haunted hotel here in Eureka Springs. For those that haven't visited and have the opportunity, do go. But what if the phenomenon has something to do with where we go after we die? or what we become after we die? And what if there's a void that can't be crossed openly, but can occasionally be glimpsed, them to us to them? And what if the visitors aren't extraterrestrials, but they're us, but after we're gone, and gone somewhere else? I don't know where. Maybe something biblical, heaven and hell, or purgatory, or maybe something completely different. I don't know. You know, we put, as I often like to say, when we talk about all of this, gods, devils, angels, demons, aliens, ghosts, spirits, all of these are just our own words. They're labels that we put on things, labels that we come up with to fit in with our culture, our knowledge, our belief system. What if the reality is something different, something altogether different? So the idea that something about this has to do with death is also, I think, something that should go into the pot. You know, because as I say, this is it's like a range of options for us. And perhaps when I talked about these labels, the words that we use, we just stick them on to a phenomena that may defy labeling. It reminds me of the Donald Rumsfeld quote. You know, when Rumsfeld was sack deaf, he gave that speech. He said there are unknown unknowns. And what he meant was that, you know, there are some known unknowns. And we know about those, or we know roughly kind of what we're looking for. And a known unknown would be something like, you know, what is the maximum range of that new North Korean ballistic missile? And we've probably, through intelligence, got a reasonable idea of what the answer is, but we don't have necessarily the exact answer, and they may not want to always fire it at its maximum range. I mean, remember what I said about how often in intelligence work you want to hide a capability that you have. So you don't always fire to the maximum range, because wouldn't it be good if you could get people to think that the range is, you know, I don't know, 3,000 miles, and actually it's 5,000 miles. Well, that's a deception operation if the other side buys that. So those are unknown. Those are known unknowns. But the unknown unknowns are the things that we don't yet know that we don't know. I know, it's kind of crazy, right? And that's kind of what we might be dealing with here. Because as I say, these are just our labels that we're putting on things. Aliens, interdimensional beings. I mean, I haven't really mentioned that, but for anyone following what's going on at places like the Large Hadron Collider, the great particle accelerator in Europe, theoretical physicists who specialize in string theory will tell you that you need the existence of these hidden dimensions for the equations to even hang together. And now they've found the Higgs boson, and I saw that Peter Higgs died the other day. Now during the total eclipse, I think, I saw some conspiracy theories on that. It's like, wow, you know, they're firing up the Large Hadron Collider, and the guy that found the God particle died during the total eclipse. Could anything get weirder? Oh yeah, it could get weirder. But they're firing up the Large Hadron Collider, and now they're talking about the future particle collider, which will be orders of magnitude above even the LHC. And I mentioned to you earlier the rumor about the James Webb Space Telescope having found strong evidence of an extraterrestrial biosphere. You've probably heard another rumor going around, which is not entirely without foundation, that a number of theoretical physicists are beginning to think we might have something fundamentally wrong with our model of the universe. Not that we even yet have a model that can really link the standard model at macro level to the quantum, but you know, even those people that talk about that and the theory of everything, there is a growing feeling, I call it a buzz, that we might have something fundamentally wrong, some huge misconception about the universe. And if we've got that wrong, maybe we've got it wrong about ourselves too and our place in that universe, which opens up a whole nother line of inquiry. But back to the unknown unknowns and these labels. People say, you know, when you speak to people in the UFO community and say, are you ready for disclosure? Everyone's like, yeah, bring it on. And I get that. But I'm saying that's what disclosure really looks like. A locked door to keep something out, perhaps. And you know, it's like a thought experiment. If I told you that if you went through that door, there is something that you wouldn't expect here, something really bizarre. A lot of you might go through the door, you know, just to see. If I told you, this is a little thought experiment. If I told you, go through that door, I'll give you $10,000, and behind that door, there is an animal. It could be any animal, and it will be randomly selected by a computer. Who's going to go for it? Well, fine, it could be a butterfly or a whatever, but it could be a tiger. So that's kind of disclosure. Everyone's kind of saying, bring it on, we're ready. And I'm not saying, you know, you can't have it, but I'm saying think very carefully about what it might be, what it could be. And I've put some possibilities out there, but there are many, many other possibilities. And particularly when you come to the unknown unknowns, there are probably an infinite amount of possibilities that we just couldn't conceive of. I mean, when the former Astronomer Royal in the UK was talking about extraterrestrial intelligence, he said, us trying to understand it, if it is more advanced than us, and bear in mind, in a universe nearly 14 billion years old, there might be civilizations out there with a billion-year head start on us. There might be things out there that we couldn't conceive of. And the Astronomer Royal, Sir Martin Rees, said it would be like trying to explain quantum physics to a chimpanzee. Only this time, we're the chimpanzees when it comes to trying to understand this thing that some of us label UFOs and aliens, and some label demons, and some label interdimensional entities, and some label non-human intelligences, whether biological, post-biological, or both and something else that doesn't even have a label. So I'm going to wrap up now, and I'm going to open to some questions. But I want to kind of leave you really with this thought, and I want to go a little controversial. A final thought. Okay, I'm not going to be political, but well, make of this what you will. Disclosure. Do we have a model for it? And think of it this way. I worked in government, so I kind of know how government thinks. Let's suppose disclosure is a thing and people are thinking about it. Shall we do it? shall we not do it? Do we have a model for it? Well, no, self-evidently we don't, because it hasn't happened yet. And first contact can only happen once, because it's the first. You can then have second, third, and all of that. But there's only ever going to be one day when it happens for the first time for real, for everyone. Do we have a model for it? Of course we don't, self-evidently. Government, all the people, and there are factions. You've gathered from what I said at the beginning of my talk, there are factions in government struggling for narrative control on this issue. Believer faction and a skeptic faction, though the skeptic faction doesn't necessarily think there's nothing to it. They may think it's something else, something terrifying. But in all of this, I'm thinking back again to David Grush and what he said about non-human intelligences. And I just want to take a moment for us to actually think what that might entail. And do we have a model? Well, yes. As it happens, we do. And everyone's going, what? Wait, you just said that it hasn't happened, so it can only happen once. Do we have a model that these factions, considering disclosure in government, can look at? Has anything happened in the last few years that came suddenly and unexpectedly from left field and changed all our lives? Do we have something? Yes, we do. And it's called COVID. And here's the thing. We had contingency plans for global pandemic. I've read some of them. They're sitting there in government files. Some of them have even been declassified. We had plans for it. It was not unexpected that there would be a global pandemic. And the world went mad. They shut down the world. People, yes, COVID was very real and very serious, but the reaction to COVID was almost your literal definition of panic in the streets. And I'm sure you can remember some of the incidents. Remember the 2-year-old being dragged off a plane because he couldn't keep a mask on. Remember the paddle boarder in the middle of nowhere being surrounded by the cops when outside transmission wasn't even a thing. Remember the schools being closed down when children were statistically at more risk of dying of a car accident on the way to school than COVID caught at school. The world went mad. And if the world went mad for something that we all knew was a possibility and we even had contingency plans for, what's going to happen the day after disclosure? Particularly if it comes with a dark side. Particularly if the reason for the secrecy is that there truly is a secret too terrible to be told. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. Nick is going to take questions for the remainder of his time.
20 minutes.
So we got about 20 minutes. Does everybody remember the rules of coming up here? So please remember the rules. Come on up.
Nick, back in 2018, when I was at the International UFO Conference, just a comment, Linda Moulton Howe had talked about the AIs that were being worked on, and they ended up killing 29 people involved in the program. In 2017, that's 7 years ago. Do you have any conversation with Linda that gives any hint of what's been going on since then?
I do talk to Linda from time to time, and I don't have an update on that particular story. What I can say, I mean, almost self-evidently, is that if you look at, for example, in computing, Moore's law, and if you draw that graph of the almost exponential rise that we see. Anything that Linda was being told about as a concern in 2017, 2018, is going to be orders of magnitude more potent now. And here's another thing. A really smart, let's suppose there is sentient AI already. One thing that sentient AI might do is not let on that it's sentient until it's really, really sure that we can't pull the plug. That's about all I have on that.
Thank you for your presentation. That was great, by the way. So there have been murmurs in the UFO community and astrological community and paranormal community, I think, for a couple of years now about some event triggering a major contact event around 2027. What is your opinion on that? What might be the cause of that or the need for that?
Yes, I have absolutely heard that same story, and I've heard a couple of different dates. I've heard 2026, but mainly, as you say, 2027. I have heard that, obviously, with apologies. I don't like doing this, but I have heard that from somebody with well, a former member of the intelligence community who I won't name because I don't want to attribute, but somebody who was pretty well placed. I have heard that rumor. This, I think, ties in with two concepts, and you may be familiar with these two phrases, but for those that aren't, it's worth just spending a minute or two on them. The two phrases are controlled disclosure and catastrophic disclosure. Now, controlled disclosure is kind of what it says on the tin, and that ties in with your question, because in controlled disclosure, what I'm hearing is that there is a timeline and that everything that's happened, pretty much starting with the New York Times story in December 2017 about ATIP and the US Navy videos, that was the first step, and everything that's happened since has been part of that process. But like any plan, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And particularly if we are dealing with another intelligence, whatever the true nature of that intelligence itself may get a say and actually may get the deciding vote as to how all this unfolds. So 2027, sure, I've absolutely heard that, and I've heard it in relation to if everything goes to plan, there will be a sort of, near us, damn it, a kind of my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone moment in 2027. But all this pushback, all this factional infighting is leading to the possibility of catastrophic disclosure. And catastrophic disclosure is one of two things. It's essentially two versions of the same thing. It's either it all just comes out at once in a big mess, and as with that last slide, it may not be pleasant, or for geopolitical reasons, an adversary does it and kind of upsets the apple cart a bit. And that adversary might not necessarily be who you would think it would be. It doesn't even have to be a nation state. It doesn't have to be China, Russia, or whoever. It could be, a terror organization or anything, because the geopolitical consequences of this could bring down the very societies and structures that some people want to bring down. So I am keeping an eye on 2027, but with catastrophic disclosure, it might happen sooner. Or, of course, all of this may just be incorrect and deception, and it may take longer. That's a very long-winded way of saying I don't know, but you know what? I was having this discussion with someone just before lunch, and I said, if ever anyone stands up and says, hey, I've got all the answers, and I'm going to tell you what it is, don't believe it. look for the people, particularly the well-placed people, who say, we've got some data on that, but the honest answer is, I don't know. Those are the people I listen to. So I've heard 2027, but I don't know.
Thank you.
And Nick, just a comment to that. The aliens could change their agenda and land at a time that we aren't ready for.
That's exactly correct. That's why I say we are not the only kind of party in this, and we're not even the dominant of if you just say it's us and them, we are not the dominant partner in that relationship. So you're absolutely right. They could land, or they could do something unequivocal to reveal their existence to us.
And I've also heard 2033, and then some adjustment to that to 2035, 2036 as a first contact time. So have you heard anything like that also?
Not so much, no. But I mean, I think it's like with some of this, it's like pick a day, any day. I never want it to be so far in the future that it becomes like tomorrow never comes, because, yeah. But there are, at least the 2027, I have heard that from somebody who was genuinely and verifiably part of the IC.
Right. So, in other words, that might be part of an actual plan.
It might be, but on the other hand, it could be a psyop. Okay. This is why I say, even if elements in the intelligence community are putting it out there that this might be 2027, who's to say that that whole thing is necessarily the true narrative? Very often, it's bread and butter to people in the intelligence community to deliberately put out a false narrative.
Mr. Pope, thank you so much for your presentation. That kind of ties into my question. How concerned should the average interested party be that it's mostly the military and the military's projection on the phenomenon that's controlling the narrative right now?
I think that's an interesting question. My cynical answer is people shouldn't really be concerned much at all, not because it isn't a big deal, but because there's frankly not much we can do about it. Now, that's just a very kind of cynical, pragmatic view. There is no getting away from the fact that some UFO sightings are attributable to secret prototype aircraft, missiles, and drones, and that some will be our own tech or an ally, and some may be an adversary. But beyond that, I can't say much. Is it a bad thing that the military are in the driving seat? Well, one of my favorite movies, one of Richard Burton's last, if not his final one, The Medusa Touch, and there's that great line where he says, we find what powers the sun, and we make bombs of it. So, yeah, having the military in the driving seat takes you down a certain road, the road of threat, the road of weaponization. That's why it's interesting that France is one of the few nations in the world that embeds its UFO program not in the Air Force or in the DoD, but actually in their scientific community. The French program, JEPIN, is, I said that very well, JEPIN. Je ne sais pas. Bof. Is embedded in CNES, which is the French National Space Research Institution.
Hello, Mr. Pope. Thank you very much. I was just curious. So, in your presentation, as you speak about the possible types of non-human intelligence, that have been postulated about, do you have maybe I'd say educated speculation or anything that you do know? As David Grush stated, that they have recovered bodies. You can tell about something potentially based on evidence. Do you have any potential speculation about motive for why non-human intelligence would be here or what they're attempting to do?
I think that's a really profound question, and it's one that has a number of different potential answers depending on what essentially is going down. One thing that I didn't have a chance to talk about, so I'm very glad that I now have that chance, is simulation theory. Now, of course, their simulation theory is not new. Nick Bostrom kind of is regarded as the founding father of it, but essentially the idea that we're in a matrix of some sort, and that either planet Earth or indeed the observable universe as we perceive it is actually a simulation, but a simulation on the part of who or what? Is it simply that we are a computer program being experimented on, run as a kind of, maybe as a science experiment by, kind of super advanced extraterrestrials, or are we, as per Nick Bostrom's original theory, ancestor simulations, because a future civilization would want to bring back its ancestors? I don't know. And one interesting thing that I do know about simulation theory, I don't think this is a secret, but I don't hear much discussion about it. But I used to live in San Jose for part of the year. And of course, when you're in the Bay Area, you inevitably kind of pick up on what all the tech billionaires and all the people headquartered around the Bay Area are doing. There are a surprising number of those tech billionaires who are quite invested intellectually in simulation theory being true. And I think that's known. What is less known is that some of them are actually funding attempts to, and I'm going to use the phrase, it's a little clumsy, but it's a better, to bust us out of the matrix, probably with a high energy pulse of some sort, so that if this is a civilization, if this is a simulation, a high energy pulse of some sort might just take the system down and allow us to meet the programmers. But who are the programmers? Are they an alien civilization? Are they from the future? Are we just a science experiment? And is some teacher somewhere just about to pull the plug, or saying this has gone completely crazy? You'll not believe how mad these people are. We got to end this. This is just insane. Or is it something else? And is it? But if it's not a simulation, if we are being interacted, I like to think the best I can come up with is that they're coming here as anthropologists, because to a truly advanced civilization in the cosmos, newly emerging civilizations might just be the last interesting thing. Which way is this civilization going to go? Which way is that civilization going to go? And the moment you have first contact, you have what I call a sort of cultural contamination. And we see it on this planet, of course, when the European explorers interacted with indigenous peoples. Well, firstly, it didn't end up too well for the indigenous peoples. But secondly, in the end, everyone ends up wearing kind of, you can go halfway around the world and everyone ends up wearing the same thing. There's this cultural contamination. In the early 20th century, if you look at some of the marvelous old photos, black and white photos of the world leaders meeting, you'll see all this wonderful kind of different costumes that all the people were wearing. Now everyone's just in a suit, right? That's cultural contamination, and we've lost something. So I think extraterrestrials visiting Earth, watching this crazy but newly emerging civilization, know that once we know that we're not alone, we get that cultural contamination. So like a good anthropologist, like a good wildlife documentary maker, the best interaction comes from when we don't know that the camera's there. And are we a wildlife documentary? Are we I'm being serious. Are we a reality show? Are we a science experiment? And all those things come to an end. We have not been picked up for the next season.
In light of what Nick has just said, everybody should go downstairs and run up all your credit cards to the max. All that mail you're throwing away, open those envelopes and say yes to every one of those loan offers. All right.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I always appreciate that you're so measured in your comments. Two quick questions. One, with all the information that's floating around from Ancient Aliens to Skinwalker Ranch and Roswell, is there one example that comes to your mind that would convince a skeptic that yes, there are indeed extraterrestrial aliens visiting? That's number one. Number two, intergalactic or interdimensional?
I think on the first, I would pick a British case called the Cosford incident, not Rendlesham Forest, which is, of course, Britain's best-known UFO incident, but the Cosford incident, huge triangular-shaped craft flying over various Air Force bases, narrow beams of light coming down, a sudden acceleration from hover or virtual hover to high Mach speeds with no sonic boom, one of what Lou Elizondo and others calls one of the 5 observables of the phenomenon. So that would be the answer to the first. The answer to the second, I mean, in intergalactic or interdimensional, I mean, I would fall back on both. Why, you know, those two are not mutually exclusive. We can have a universe where life arises elsewhere because unless we're in a simulation, and it's all wrong, the laws of physics do seem to be the same in the observable universe. So unless we thought there was something almost literally magical in a Harry Potter sense about Earth, the factors that gave rise to life here should replicate elsewhere. And we do just seem to be a fairly ordinary little rocky planet orbiting a fairly ordinary sort of star. So I can imagine life arising elsewhere, and I can imagine that because it's a good survival strategy, just random mutation, natural selection, that intelligence would be selected for, and that therefore civilizations should arise. And we see that drive to complexity here with life on Earth. But that said, interdimensional, absolutely. Some of the string theory equations, though someone like me can't possibly understand them, I know that far smarter people than me, like Michio Kaku, live and breathe this sort of thing. And think of it this way. ATIP spent $22 million looking at UFOs. The Large Hadron Collider cost about $10 billion. And the Future Hadron Collider, or the Future Particle Accelerator, will cost more. Well, 22 million versus 10 billion. Does someone know or suspect something? It's like a game of poker. You put your stack of money where you think you think you might find something. You know, that one. So someone's betting big on interdimensional, but my answer remains both. Both plus other things as well, including those unknown unknowns. What a great question to finish on, so thank you for that.